Namaste and greetings. I, Naina Agarwal, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Navniti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered here for a panel discussion on EWS reservations, perceptions, and policy. This discussion is organized by Center for Human Dignity and Development as a part of the series The State of Human Dignity and Development #Inclusive Development. I feel privileged to introduce chair and moderator for this panel discussion, Dr. Ajay Gudavarthy. Dr. Ajay Gudavarthy is Associate Professor at Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. We welcome you, sir. We welcome our eminent panelists for this important deliberation. As panelists, we have Professor G. Gopal. Professor Gopal is constitutional expert and an eminent scholar. Sir was former director of the National Judicial Academy of the Supreme Court of India and former director, Vice-Chancellor of the National Law School of India, Bengaluru, and former director, Rajiv Gandhi Institute of Contemporary Studies, New Delhi. We welcome you, sir. Shri T.K. Arun. Sir is renowned journalist and columnist. We welcome you, sir. Shri Abdul Hafiz Gandhiji. Sir is national spokesperson, Samajwadi Party. We welcome you, sir. We look forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Now, without any further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Ajay Gudavarthy to start the session with his opening remark and start the proceeding further. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Naina. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let me begin by welcoming my co-panelist, Mr. T.K. Arun, a senior and a well-known journalist, and Abdul Hafiz, who's a national spokesperson of SP, and Abdul, and we did some programs earlier for IMPRI on very contentious issue. So whenever there is a contentious issue, I think I and Abdul are the common factors for IMPRI's many of their programs. And then we are hoping to meet a very old friend, Mr. Mohan Gopal, who earlier Vice-Chancellor of National Law School and then of Judicial Academy. So let's coming to today's topic. I think I shared one of my write-ups with my co-panelists, and now to begin with, I think we are all in agreement, more or less, about the fact that there is a long-term implication of this policy, which is our hunch or our concern and worry is that caste-based reservations are, either gradually or through a stroke of a policy going to be constitutionally made null and void, and it is going to shift to an economic right. So that's the broad concern on which I think all of us agree and should resist it. But some of the questions that I really had, and if panelists could take up in course of their interventions, is that much of this social analysis that we are offering is failing to turn into a political narrative, that there is no ready constituency for this kind of a social discourse. I think we have seen in the last month or so, couple of months since the judgment has come, a range of articles in various English dailies and maybe in the regional newspapers too. There is no mobilization, and I think this question is really for Hafiz to answer, of the Dalit Bahujans and especially even the backward caste in any perceptible numbers against this policy. And that, I think, should tell us something about the way hegemony really works, quite in contrast to the way social analysis is happening. So I perceive a gap between our constitutional provisions and the way we expect them to work, and the fact that a right-wing political party like the BJP and the RSS don't seem to think that a policy like EWS is going to politically hurt them. That they are on one hand going to consolidate the caste Hindu votes because they have offered this policy, which actually practically is offering them nothing, because with an 8 lakh cap, you almost, I think, 80 to 90% of caste Hindus get included, given the economic data that shows. So they were anyway getting in, whether with EWS or minus EWS. So this is a very strange policy where nobody benefits, but somebody is excluded. Having said it's an economic criteria, they've excluded SC, ST, and OBCs. But that has not led to any big time mobilization on the ground. That's my first question, that, how does one answer this, that there is an absence of this kind of a debate on the ground. Mobilized political parties have not been able to mobilize. Most opposition parties are either confused or have refused to take a very strong position on this question. So that's my first question, as to what explains this confidence of the BJP RSS that they can get away and they can continue to have the social support of SCs, STs, and OBCs in spite of a policy that looks overtly discriminatory. One, economic criteria itself is something that is unconstitutional. Second, to eliminate SC and ST OBCs is overtly political, but that is not leading to the kind of mobilization as we expect. Second, my discomfort with much of the analysis that has come out has really been this somewhat uncomfortable comparison between poverty and caste. That the idea that poverty, much of analysis said that poverty is transitory, but caste is permanent. Poverty only leads to deprivation, but caste leads to both deprivation and discrimination. While sociologically that might be true, but I was wondering, what do we gain by this kind of a juxtaposition between class and caste? We began our sociological analysis 20 years back that class is caste in the Indian context. Today, the debate has turned between class versus caste, and that I refuse to see the fact that poverty is so transitory in nature that people have no debilitating impact. I think poverty is also equally debilitating. It carries its own stigma. Intergenerational, if you look at the data, intergenerational mobility is not only in countries like India, but even in advanced capitalist countries like Germany and United States, intergenerational mobility is very, very limited. So I think we need to also, even as we analyze caste and its debilitating impact, I think poverty and class are equally structural in context. It's very difficult to people to overcome. You might have anecdotal evidence of people overcoming, but if you take bulk of it, is that we reproduces, class reproduces itself. Therefore, the fact that we have been pushed to a back foot, and therefore the analysis is pitching in terms of poverty versus caste. What is its political outcome? I mean, that's my point was that that's what BJP RSS expect us. That's the critique they're expecting. But should we really fall into that trap? I have some other questions, but I think I'll hold it for now. And I will request Abdul to please go ahead and present his views from 10 to 12 minutes. Naina, that would be good enough.
Yes.
So nothing very strict, but let's keep it to 12 minutes so that we have some time for discussion within the panelists and then from the audience. So over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay Gudavarthy, for giving me this opportunity to, deliberate on a very important issue, which has, occupied much of the national attention in these days. I would also thank the organizers for inviting me to express my views on this topic. Now, before I go much deeper into today's discussion, let me start my deliberation by certain observations which were made by Professor Satish Deshpande he in a write-up said that on 9th January 2019, the idea of reservation, which is anti-discrimination, died the day when Parliament passed this EWS reservation bill in just 3 days. And then he further says that the Anteshti, or the last rites of the idea of anti-discrimination, was performed by the Supreme Court on 7th November 2022, when Supreme Court upheld 103rd constitutional amendment providing for 10% reservation. And I say the reservation for forward caste Hindus, because this reservation excludes the persons belonging to SC, ST, OBC, who constitute the majority of the poorest of the people. So when you say that this EWS reservation is for giving or attaining egalitarian society, how can you attain egalitarian society by excluding the 82% of the people, according to Sino Commission, which says that 82% of the poor of this country, they are from the SC, ST, OBC population. So he says in a write-up that Supreme Court performed the Anteshti, or the last rites of the idea of the reservation as a instrument of redressing the accumulated sense of injustice, or historical sense of injustice. Now, let me begin by saying that what do you mean by reservation, and why we require reservation as a tool for egalitarian society. Now, when you say that reservation is some sort of quota, then it means that you set aside certain percentage of seats or certain opportunities for a particular group, and you debar certain other groups, no matter what their situation is, from the benefits of that quota. Now, when you make economic ground as a basis for reservation, then you are doing what? That you are giving this chance to everybody, because poverty as an attribute, anybody can have, anybody can possess. So by making economic criteria as the criteria for giving reservation, or for giving quotas, you are undermining the very essence of the reservation policy, or the reservation as such. And here I disagree with you that poverty is transit. You say that poverty is transient. Yes, poverty is transient, but caste is permanent. Even if you attain the economic status as high as Babu Jagjeevan Ram or the former president of India, but you will not be allowed at certain places. You cannot inaugurate a statue, and you will be insulted for inaugurating a statue. And this happened with Babu Jagjeevan Ram in 1978. And that is why I say that yes, poverty may bring certain disadvantage to you, but caste is a permanent feature of the society. And that is why when you make quotas and you exclude certain groups from it, then you require justification for it, a strong justification for it. And discrimination is the justification for excluding people. But when you say that poverty will be the criteria, so poverty is easily treatable. You can adopt certain measures where you can alleviate poverty. But the caste is intractable problem. Caste cannot be easily treatable, and therefore you require reservation. Therefore, you require quotas. And therefore, reservation became a special tool for addressing the inequalities. And delinking reservation from the question of social justice is not a good idea. And why it is not a good idea? Because by excluding the quota, you provide differential treatment to people. But when you say that economic criteria will be the criteria, you are saying that there is no differential treatment. Now everybody will be treated alike. So in a way, you are treating the victims and perpetrators of the system alike, which should not happen. Now, coming to the present decision of the Supreme Court, which Supreme Court delivered on 7th November 2022, the Janhit Abhiyan decision, and I disagree with this decision on various counts. But let me start with the first objection which I have, and that is that why there was a delay of nearly 4 years in deciding such an important issue like EWS. Supreme Court took nearly 4 years to decide this issue. And what happened during this? That the central government and the state government, they implemented the EWS quota. Now, when you implement EWS quota, then it becomes very difficult to undo it. And this might be in the thinking process of the Supreme Court that it took 4 years, and the EWS quota has already been implemented. And if we undo it, there would be tremendous, harms to the people who have, taken admission in EWS category, or who have got the employment in EWS category. So my very first objection, my very first worry is that why Supreme Court took nearly 4 years in deciding such an important issue. And it is because of this delay, I think, that it became very difficult. And this I'm saying with all due respect to the Supreme Court and all due respect to the wisdom of the judges of the Supreme Court, that it might be, running behind their, thinking that if we undo this, then it will bring a lot of, damage. Now, second objection is, as Professor Gudavarthy already pointed out, the exclusion of SC, ST, OBC from the ambit of EWS quota. Now, I told you already the Sino Commission has mentioned this fact that 82% poor belong to SC, ST, OBC communities. Now, excluding them, and this is excluding them on the ground that they enjoyed pre-existing benefit, is to heap fresh injustice on the past disability. So you cannot say that we want to, bring egalitarian society. We want to usher in an era where we have casteless society. And that is why we are providing reservation on economic basis by excluding 82% of the people, because majority of the poor, according to various studies, and Sino Commission also pointed out that majority of the people, poor people, they belong to SC/ST. But 103rd Constitutional Amendment excluded those people who are already getting reservation. This means that SC, SC, ST, and OBC, they will not get the benefit of reservation, EWS reservation. Now, how we can say that only general category economic disadvantages are to be addressed? You cannot say this, that only people belonging to general caste or who are belonging to general caste, their economic disadvantage has to be addressed. Why economic disadvantage of those who are belonging to SC/ST and OBC is not to be addressed? This is the basic question, which Justice Ravindra Bhatt has also emphasized in the judgment. The next point is that in the present judgment, EWS judgment, Janhit Abhiyan judgment, the Supreme Court failed to, ask how the current EWS criteria devised to identify EWS is suitable in achieving the egalitarian goal. Because the ceiling limit or the income limit is too high. 66,000 rupees per month. 8 lakhs, those people below 8 lakhs, they will enjoy the benefit. So this ceiling limit is too high. And the Supreme Court has not asked any question with regard to high ceiling limit. So high ceiling limit will ensure that the middle class and not the poorest of the poor end up sharpening off the benefits. So the middle class again will, siphon off the benefits. The next thing which I see in the judgment is that judgment is contradictory at various places. Let me quote Justice Bela Trivedi. And Justice Bela Trivedi says that quotas should be phased out to create casteless society. We need to revisit the system of reservation in the larger interest of the society as a whole. Now, while affirming the reservation, Justice Bela Trivedi is talking of phasing out reservation. Now, these two things cannot happen simultaneously. On one hand, you are saying that there is a need to revisit, there is a need to phase out reservation. And on the other hand, you are affirming reservation to a particular section of the society by upholding 103rd Constitutional Amendment. And this is the oft repeated argument that reservation has not invented caste. And by concealing caste, you are unlikely to diminish caste-based inequalities. If you, Justice Bela Trivedi is saying that phase out reservations, but by phasing out, you cannot have casteless society. Concealing caste will not diminish the caste inequalities. And let me give you a certain example. Narendra Jadhav, who was the member of the RPI for 31 years, he's an economist. And he, in his autobiography, says that he always felt as a mahar when he worked there. So his colleagues always treated him as a mahar. He may attain, economic status, but his caste will remain with him forever. And that is what Narendra Jadhav observed in his autobiography. And I've already given the examples of Babu Jagjeevan Ram and the former president of India, where they were insulted because of their caste. So they might attain political status, they might attain social status, but caste will not leave them. And therefore, I say that when Justice Bela Trivedi says, first, the statement is, away from reality, and second, there is a contradiction because on one hand, you are saying to phase out reservation, and on the other hand, you approve. So it is ironic that while affirming EWS reservation policy, judge has questioned the future reservation itself. Now, similarly, Justice J.B. Pardiwala, he observed that a larger percentage of backward classes attain acceptable standard of education and employment, that they should be removed from the backward class. So Justice Pardiwala says that backward people have attained acceptable standards of education and employment, and they should be phased out. And he said this without supporting his statement by empirical evidence. Again, this might be obiter dicta, but these observations are very important. Again, he said that reservation was meant for 10 years. Now, with due respect to him, he confused the reservation based on social justice with the political reservation. So when he said that reservation was meant for 10 years, he confused with the reservation which was provided to eliminate inequality in the society. Now, the next point which I want to highlight is that in January 2020 itself, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, who is now this CJI, he, in a decision, Neil Oriolio Nunes versus Union of India, explained how reservation is not at odds with merit. And he also emphasized the role of reservation in remedying the structural disadvantages. So in January 2022 itself, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, in Neil Oriolio Nunes versus Union of India, he highlighted the importance of reservation. And he said that reservation is not anti-merit. He said that reservation is required to remedy the structural disadvantages. Now, this judgment treat reservation as a poverty elevation scheme. which is opposite to what Justice Chandrachud said in January 2022. So how come Supreme Court reverses is it sent so quickly or so soon that in January 2020, Supreme Court regarded reservation as not anti-merit and for remedying the structural disadvantages. And in November 2022, Supreme Court did the opposite thing. Now, as far as the various judgments of the Supreme Court are concerned, for example, Indira Sahni versus Union of India, which was a 9-judge bench judgment delivered in 1992. In that judgment of 9 judges, the Supreme Court with a majority held that in the determination of backwardness, economic conditions can never be the criterion, can never be the criterion. 9-judge bench said that economic criteria can never be the criterion. And the 5-judge bench said that economic criteria does not violate the basic structure of the Constitution. So a 9-judge bench says something else, a 5-judge bench says something else, which I am unable to, comprehend. And I share the apprehension which was shared by the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister that with this Janit Abhiyan judgment, what the court is trying to do is that the court is trying to replace the phrase socially and educationally backward with the economic backwardness, economically backward. And this is the apprehension which I shared with many of the people, that slowly the government and the courts, they will do what? They will replace the educationally and socially backwardness with the economic backwardness. Now, as far as the another point which I want to highlight from this judgment is the 50% limit. The 50% limit.
Mr. Abdul, another couple of minutes.
Okay.
Thanks.
So let me highlight one very important aspect, because I'm not having too much time, which is the Article 16. Article 16 talks of equal opportunity, with the only exception that if somebody is not adequately represented, then reservation can be made for them. But if you see this reservation, 103rd Constitutional Amendment, then there is no such necessary condition attached to. And those people who were already represented, and I would say, more represented, more than adequately represented, they are given reservation in public employment. So for SC, ST, OB, for the socially and educationally backward, you have a criteria of inadequate representation. Only when they have inadequate representation, they will get reservation. But this 103rd Constitutional Amendment dealings the idea of reservation with adequate representation, which I think is an important point which needs to be deliberated upon, because this point has not been highlighted much when we talk of EWS reservation. And the other point which I want to highlight is, and this is somewhat a social point and a political point, that those people who considered reservation as anti-merit, they are now welcoming reservation. This means that reservation was never anti-merit. What you wanted was reservation for yourself. And when you get the reservation for yourself, then reservation has ceased to become anti-merit. And those people are now welcoming, and they are not saying anything when Supreme Court upheld 103rd Constitutional Amendment. When Mandal came, they opposed. When the matter of other reservation, SC, OBC reservation comes, they oppose it. But they readily accepted the 103rd Constitutional Amendment, as well as the judgment of the Supreme Court. Now, as far as reforms are concerned, what is the way ahead? Now, I would like to highlight that the way ahead is the sub-classification of beneficiaries to enhance equal access. Then second, maybe the caste census to be conducted in order to understand the structural disadvantages. Third is that the government, and you might be seeing that, like the government of Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, etc., they are hiking the quantum of reservation because the Supreme Court said that the limit is inviolable. It is not inviolable. The limit is not inflexible. The limit is flexible. So with this observation, the certain state governments are now pressurizing the center for bringing constitutional amendment or for putting their laws into 9th schedule so that it, the Supreme Court cannot scrutinize the constitutional validity of those laws which they are now trying to enact in their states. And this would be very difficult for the center to avoid because center cannot say yes or no. If it says yes, then certain constituency will get angry, and it says yes, no, then certain other constituency will get angry. So it is a very, the center will be in dilemma as certain states increase their demand for bringing a constitutional amendment so that their laws of hiking the reservation, they are protected. So I rest my case here.
Thank you, Mr. Abdul, for that very precise and powerful presentation. I think we will have some questions. We will take up some more debate on this. While I warm welcome to Professor Mohan Gopal. So nice to see you after a long time. So while you warm up, I'll now request Mr. Arun to make his presentation, and then we'll have Professor Mohan Gopal make his presentation. So over to you, Mr. Arun.
Yeah, I'll stick with it, say 10, 11 minutes. At the outset, the basic criticism of the judgment is contained in the minority view in the court presented by Justice Lalit and Justice Bhatt. This is discriminatory. It discriminates against the poor among the non-forward caste people, and therefore, being constitutionally invalid, this quota should be scrapped. That is the main contention of the minority judgment. But this has been, much talked about. I would like to point to some other larger issues. After 75 years of independence, we are a nation with sufficient resources now at our command to fulfill the educational aspirations of all our young people. Why don't we put these resources to use to actually provide all the facilities for anybody who wants to study anything to fulfill that need? Why do we need reservations? Why are educational opportunities so limited that we still need to find quotas on whatever criteria? Second, in the 75 years, the basic injustice of having a hierarchical social structure has not been adequately addressed. And this hierarchy is not just at the ritual level, but it is in terms of in areas that decide your basic capability to function as a democracy. To the extent that power is distributed in society in a very unequal fashion, and some people are more powerful socially, politically, economically than others, this makes the working of a democracy anything more than a formal institutional affair than being substantively functional. Why is this not being addressed? This is a basic issue. Today, we find an increasing attack on Muslim tradition and Muslim custom, which is incompatible with the requirements of modern democracy. So while the Constitution abolished the caste inequality and caste hierarchy, that has remained at the level of formal law. the formal norm, but social custom and social norm still functioned on the basis of the traditional hierarchy. Why has society not progressed to remove this? And why has the call to annihilate caste that Ambedkar raised so many years ago been abandoned by virtually all political parties? You had anti-caste movements which quickly transformed into caste solidarity movements, and they have remained caste solidarity movements. Each caste has its own caste solidarity movement and its political party, and they have abandoned the goal of abolishing caste or annihilating caste. Why are we not discussing that? Now, these are, larger issues. Unless we take up that agenda of annihilating caste, attacking the fundamentals of the moral, ethical, and material and ideological basis of caste, we'll be debating whether we need reservations or we don't need reservations. So this calls for substantial changes in the way we live. Our broad-based economic growth is actually the only way to end material deprivation. And that is very key to empowering people to play a larger role in public life and in their own individual social progress. And a key issue there is actually primary education. If primary education is universal, there's no need for reservation. The quality of our primary education is so abysmal in most parts of the country that this is a major hindrance to social, political, and cultural empowerment of our disadvantaged sections. And nobody talks about it. You only want to talk about quotas and reservations. Now, this fundamental failure of governance to empower the population through education is something that must be tackled with the greatest political commitment by all those people who talk about social justice. And we don't see any sign of that. Third thing, now, a society like India definitely and desperately needs affirmative action to counterbalance the effects of centuries or millennia of social stratification and discrimination. The cultural deprivation is a very major impediment to social progress. This has been well established. People have studied this and it's well known. Now, but is reservation, the system of quotas, is that the only design of affirmative action? I think we need to ask this. Now, there are people who have studied affirmative action from an academic point of view. The Nobel Prize winning economist Kenneth J. Arrow has written some essays on this. He has identified two basic qualities that a successful design for affirmative action should possess. One, he says, that policy design should not kill the imperative to excel. Even if you are part of the affirmative action program, you should not get the feeling that if you don't work hard, you'll still get some role in society, you'll still make progress in society. That should not be there. You should retain the incentive to excel. Second, the design of the affirmative action should not reinforce past perceptions of inferiority. Like this guy is where he is only because of the patient, not that he has any merit. Now, those perceptions of inferiority should not be reinforced by the design, policy design of affirmative action. Now, reservations are a very blunt policy. I fully recognize and accept that Indian society with reservations is far better than Indian society without reservations. But are reservations the only form of affirmative action we can think of? Or can we think of better designs of affirmative action? Now, Professor Gudavarthy, you are in Jawaharlal Nehru University, where there used to be an admission policy which used to give deprivation points for social backwardness, regional backwardness, income backwardness. Now, those who fell into the overlap of all these different kinds of deprivations, they got the full complement of deprivation points. And whereas those who had only one form of debility, they got deprivation points for that form of debility, social, economic, or regional. And those who didn't have any of these debilities, they competed without any handicap points. Now, this system seemed fair to almost all people. Of course, there were still some people who said that merit is being compromised, but they were not many. Now, that system was actually undermined by the inability to administer the system. Because those days, it was fairly easy to secure a caste certificate, certifying you to belong to that you belong to a caste which is socially backward, whereas you did not. It was possible to get an income certificate saying that your income was 1/100th of your actual income, and still you could qualify for income deprivation. So over time, the very reasonable admission policy was undermined by forgery and fraudulence on the part of the socially powerful who claimed deprivations based on falsified documents. But today, when Aadhaar tags you all through your life, it is very difficult to forge these certificates without that casting a shadow on your reputation as you go ahead in life. So it's very risky to get a false income certificate because it might be traced back to you sometime in the future. So it is a viable situation now. So I think it is possible to design a better form of affirmative action than blunt reservations. I think we need to act on all these fronts. Improve primary education, the quality of primary education, which is the basic prerequisite for empowering people from all backgrounds to realize their full human potential. Second, have broad-based participatory growth so that the benefits of economic growth is widely distributed. And I don't think that redistributive policy by the government by itself can achieve any fair degree of equal opportunity. It has to come from the production process itself by empowering people to be part of the production process, which is what is meant by a broad-based participative economic growth. And policy should focus on that. And third, the goal of eliminating caste, that has to be revived. So this embraces a wide range of activities, starting from ritual reform within the Hindu religion. So I finished my 10 minutes. I set myself a timer. I think it is time to revive these kind of debates and not just focus on reservations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arun, for that very pointed take on, and I think this calls for an interesting debate. I think it's a complete contrasting presentation between the emphasis in Mr. Abdul's presentation as against yours. I mean, these are debates which we have been having for the last 50 years. No, India is an interesting place that we have to go over and over those debates. So you did refer to JNU's deprivation points as one possible way out. So we will get back to these issues. I will have some questions to raise. But before that, I have the privilege of inviting Professor Mohan Gopal, who was earlier also director of the Rajiv Gandhi Institute. So Professor Mohan Gopal, it's over to you. About 10 to 15 minutes is what we are allotting. So it's over to you now.
Thank you, Professor Ajay Gudavarthy. It's very good to be with you in a program after a long break, and looking forward to that. I start by apologizing for being a little late. I was driving from Kochi to Trivandrum, and I should have been here much earlier, several hours earlier, well in time for this discussion. But due to unexpected reasons, my travel got delayed. So I was a few minutes late joining you. My apologies for that, but I did catch a fair part of the excellent presentation first made by Mr. Abdul and then Mr. Arun's presentation. Let me say that it is going to be almost impossible for me to say what I have to say in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So I may need a little more time. So I'm really, even the very short version. And let me give you an overview of what I'm planning to say. And then if you don't have time, you don't have time. Your topic is EWS Reservations, Perception and Policy. So I first want to address, I intend to address three areas of in which the perception has been deliberately distorted, both in speech and in presentation in constitutional language, and deliberately distorted. And basically, there is a lot of false advertisement. And with the greatest respect, I think both, I would say from my point of view, both presentations also accept that false presentation of this reservation. So we want to question that. And these false reservations are in three respects. One is, this is not economic reservation at all. This is reservation for socially and educationally forward classes with a creamy layer exclusion. Economic reservation is where social and educational status will not matter, or will not be a membership of a social, let me rephrase that, membership of a social and educational group, a caste or religious group, and which does not qualify to be backward, is never a first criterion for getting economic reservation. So here, what you're required to do in these 3 years of implementation is you've first got to get a certificate saying you do not belong to socially and educationally backward classes. The Kerala government has actually, pressed by the High Court, issued a list of eligible categories for EWS. And the column with the list says, in Malayalam, Jati. They've got a list of castes. And you've got to belong to that caste as a first step. And the second step is there's an elimination of creamy layer. This criterion is being assailed as too high because people wrongly think this is a criterion for assessing economic weakness. It's not a criteria for assessing economic weakness. It's a creamy layer cutoff. And it matches roughly the creamy layer cutoff for backward classes. So you have a reservation for social and educationally forward classes with a creamy layer cutoff, and we all call it economic reservation as something more modern, more forward-looking, towards which we must move compared to this backward caste reservation. How long can we go on, right? But the other side, we have reservation for social and educationally backward classes with a creamy layer cutoff, and we call that caste reservation. The only difference is one is for the forward class, the other is for the backward class, but both are for social groups. So that's the first deception. The second deception is that the exclusion is hidden. If their intention was to give it to social and educationally forward classes, why did the amendment not say economically weaker sections among socially and educationally forward classes? Why did they have to say other than the classes mentioned in 15.4 and 16.4? There's deception there, right? So that it will be hidden, that this is the real target, the inclusion will be hidden. So people will have to know 15.4, 16.4, will have to go back and read 15.4, 16.4. The average person won't understand that this is actually meant for social and educationally forward classes. So that's the second area of deception, which we all seem to be buying into. The third area of deception is that it is it is not, it purports to be for economically weaker sections and purports to be an implementation of Article 46, from which it draws the word economically weaker sections, but it is not for economically weaker sections. And it is totally inconsistent with the Constitution. But in the matter that we argued, these and other matters raised in the first presentation could not and cannot be considered, because the only question before that court was, is it violating basic structure or not? So these issues are not one that rise to the level of violation of basic structure. It can and will be taken up in subsequent litigation, not in this case. Because, for example, the 8 lakhs and so on really are part of administrative regulations. It's not part of the Constitution, and it's not a basic structure issue. That's why it was not part. That was why it was not decided. Indira Sawhney does not apply to this. To the 9-judge, no economic criterion does not apply to this case from a legal point of view to decide the basic structure issue. The Indira Sawhney does not. The basic structure issue simply raises the question: what is the limit on Parliament's constituent power to amend the Constitution? Right? A 9-judge bench cannot limit the constituent power of Parliament to amend the Constitution. Only the Keshavan Bharati decision, where the 13-judge bench has said that Parliament's amending power is limited by the basic structure doctrine, that you cannot violate the basic structure. So you have to bring anything that you're arguing is a violation into the basic structure, established idea of basic structure, or this bench has to establish as a basic structure before you can argue that it is part of the basic structure. So none of this has been part of the basic structure. So, but within this parameters of only this constitution provision, not getting into the implementation aspect, right? It does not satisfy, it is not economically weaker section. So I'm talking only of perception and deception, not violation of law or policy, not a basic structure violation. The fourth area, which sort of segues into the policy issues, is that there has been a complete distortion of the real nature and purpose of reservation under Article 16.4 and 15.4, which is also reflected in the earlier presentations. And and this started in the Constituent Assembly debates, where those who are from social backgrounds which have not suffered oppression cannot get it out of their head that this is nothing to do with poverty, this is nothing to do with historical deprivation, it has nothing to do with any of that. This is nothing to do with efficiency. It is something else. And then what is it? That is an issue that I'll be happy to get into in a little bit of detail and clarify. Now we come into the policy area, right? And the segue is that the deception, we have to go into what now perception to policy. What is reservation as a matter of constitutional policy? And what is its history? That's the next issue that I want to address. And then I come to a second area, which is what is its impact? What is the impact of this policy? And we can get into 2 or 3 very, very significant impacts on the policy, which are basic structure issues. The role of the new role of reservation that has been approved by this judgment is a basic structure violation, quite apart from discrimination. Is a basic structure violation, according to me, according to my argument. And I think that has been accepted by the dissent. The basic argument has been accepted by the dissent. So that's one aspect of the policy. And then we look at what are the impacts of the policy. And I'll quickly say that the impact of the policy, number one, the most important impact of the policy is that in public employment and in education, public and private, at the micro level of each institution and each educational and public employment institution, you have now put in a module of 10% of public employment and 10% of seats, educational seats, which will be occupied only by people who belong to socially and educationally forward classes. So it's an apartheid space. Now, these are people who will sit there knowing that it is only their social forwardness that has got them that 10% seat. They will defend social forwardness at the micro level. They will prevent social change. You will not even be able to raise these issues in any institution anymore because you've guaranteed a 10% presence of sanctified purity, of ethnic purity, right? Of the socially forward classes. In every institution, you planted a module, a caste apartheid module. It's already started, into which others cannot enter. Now, the real economic reservation is backward class reservation and SC/ST reservation. Why? Because any caste or community, or caste from all varnas, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, all varna, Shudra, others from the varna structure, any community, including transgender, can be included as a group in the backward classes if you meet 15 or so secular criteria, which has nothing to do with your social background, except the lack of, to use the term economic in the broadest sense of access to the resources necessary for your well-being, without having access to social resources in terms of marginalization and discrimination. And and these criteria are organized around 4 heads. The 16.4 simply says backward classes. 15.4 says socially and educationally backward classes. But the criteria as applied by the National Commission for Backward Classes organized into 4 heads: social, educational, economic, and political. It's multidimensional. It's purely economic criteria, purely secular criteria. So backward class, not caste, backward class reservation is economic reservations. And EWS is caste reservations. Now, if you have people who belong to upper castes, who as a group are deprived, they have already, and they are able, even now, even after this amendment, to be given reservations as a backward class if they satisfy these multidimensional economic criteria. So to say that this is a section that did not have reservation is a lie. I have given a list to the Supreme Court of Brahmin castes that are in the OBCs. So if you have poverty amongst forward castes, and if they're able to get reservations, the same reservations that OBC gets, and be part of the OBC, why have you created another category and expanded reservations? Because you want to weaken the ability of socially and educationally backward classes to get representation in public employment and education. You're overrepresented, but you have confined yourself to social groups who are forward class, who are not backward class, social groups. And members of those social groups, as it is now structured in the implementation, can get reservation as individuals without having to prove affiliation, except through this exclusion, with any particular group, except in a place like Kerala, where you have to prove your upper caste. Or you have to be a member of that. That's a way of proving that you're not backward class. But in other states, you just need to get a certificate that you're not a member of a backward class, which means you're a member of a socially and educationally forward class. One reason they did this is proof that there is no socially and it's actually quite logical. There is no socially and educationally forward class that as a group suffers deprivation. But you still want to give them reservation. When that group has a capacity to take care of their own members of that group, You've transferred that responsibility to the public exchequer and attacked the reservation space available for social and educationally backward classes by giving them a separate reservation as individuals, in addition to the reservation that they're already entitled to, even if they're members of the forward caste, as backward classes. So you've given them double reservations, actually. They can now, as a group, apply and get a backward class status, or they don't have to do that. As individuals, they can get EWS reservation. So they can go into the backward class reservation, but this is an apartheid sealed compartment as far as backward class scheduled castes are concerned. This is only forward class. And you put that module inside the constitution, which is a democratic constitution. What will this do? Imagine the United States amending. Imagine, never happened. Imagine the United States having an amendment to the constitution saying 10% of public employment and 10% of all American education, public and private, will be for whites only. Poor whites, financially poor whites, less than $60,000 if you take it 1-to-1 or whatever the right amount is, income, subject to a creamy layer cutoff. But that space will be only for whites. Imagine what that will do to those institutions. They're taking you straight back to pre-Civil War apartheid, or even pre-civil rights apartheid. We are bringing that back into the constitution. So you have got backward classes, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes are all open spaces. If you can prove these criteria of organizations, social organizations, economic status, any group can get into these categories. But these categories cannot move one to the other because they're on a continuum. You can't be hot and cold at the same time. So depending upon your continuum in the same identical scale of deprivation, you may either be in the backward class or scheduled caste or scheduled tribes, depending on the characteristics. That's why there is no movement between them, because you can't be hot and cold at the same time. It's on the same continuum, right? But anyone can move in there. These are open categories which promote diversity, but you've created categories now to destroy diversity, where there's no representation. Purely casteist reservation. Now, why is this significant? Because I think a well-accepted theory and very important for the social reform movements in our country is that we want equality not only between individuals, but between groups. Now, when groups have the same power, groups, social groups, self-formed organic social groups, have broadly similar levels of power, then group identity becomes irrelevant. Because no group is more powerful than the other. But when some groups are very powerful and the others are very weak, then that is a recipe for exploitation of the poor groups by the rich groups. So we need group equality. That's why Article 38(2) of the Constitution says equality not only amongst individuals, but also between groups. This is a very important principle. So we are asking for representation in order there are two ways we can move forward in India. One is to destroy the strength of the stronger groups and make everyone weak. Maybe that was the approach of the left, of the Marxist approach, that if you change production relationships, then you will destroy the strength of certain groups and all groups will become equal. You can't wipe out the groups, but they'll all become fairly equal. That underestimated the power of the powerful social groups to ever prevent that from happening. And there was no strategy from the left to destroy the power of the social groups as such. They said, no, we will not allow the weaker social groups to organize and mobilize, except as working class. But they never attacked the social identity of the upper groups, because many of them belong to those groups and believe in the hierarchical, in their culture of superiority. They're casteist, many of them. We know Dange's case famously as being so casteist that even the Communist Party could not accept that. So we need to either equalize the power amongst the groups. So the other option is to strengthen the weaker groups and make all of them powerful, right? And how do we do that? Through representation. So this is a pushback against the attempt to bring about intergroup equality, which is an objective of the Constitution. These are deontological goals, nothing to do with efficiency. We want to live in an equal society where, to quote the Constitution, there is equality not only amongst individuals, but also between social groups. I'll just read a couple of things from Ambedkar's, where the root of 16.4, then I'll stop. Each of this, there's a lot more to be said. I'm just giving you the basic sort of very superficial analysis of it. Dr. Ambedkar, speaking in the first roundtable conference, speaking on, that was 3031, and on 19 January 31, he said, I have a mandate. Remember, the demand of the Congress and the upper caste elite from the British was, we want responsible government, responsible to the people. So Ambedkar says, I have a mandate, and that is, while not opposing responsible government, to see that no responsible government is established unless it was at the same time accompanied by a truly representative government. I belong to that class which takes its stand on democracy and which seeks to destroy monopoly in every shape and form. Our aim is to realize in practice our ideal of one man, one value in all walks of life. This is speaking in 1931. He said the same thing in his 49 concluding speech to the Constituent Assembly. One man, our ideal of one man, one value in all walks of life, political, economic, and social. It is because representative government is one means to that end that the depressed classes attach to it so great a value. And it is because of its value to us that I've urged you the necessity of making your declaration subject to its fulfillment. Then he says, speaking on 28 September 1931, should the British make the transfer of power to Indians, the transfer must be accompanied by such provisions that the power shall not fall into the hands of a clique, into the hands of an oligarchy, or into the hands of a group of people, whether Mohammedan or Hindu. But that solution shall be such that power shall be shared by all communities in their respective proportions. Okay. Now, then he says, and this is the last part, he says, he had, as many of you know, Professor Gudavarthy, I'm sure, knows this better than me. Dr. Ambedkar, as you know, presented to the first roundtable conference to fulfill this. He presented a memorandum with a list of safeguards, 8 safeguards for the depressed classes, for the common people of this country. Safeguard number 4 is on adequate representation in the legislature, which was sort of wrongly and I think deprecated as communal reservation. Actually, it's electorates. Actually, what he asked for was separate electorates, which will ensure effective representation, right? We're not getting into that here. Then condition number 5 is called adequate representation in the services, for which reservation education is because education is a feeder to the services, therefore reservation education. Now, I'll just read very briefly what the condition actually said, which he submitted in writing to the roundtable conference. I'm reading. The depressed classes have suffered enormously at the hands of high caste officers who have monopolized the public services by abusing the law or by misusing the discretion vested in them in administering it, to the prejudice of the depressed classes and to the advantage of the caste Hindus without any regard to justice, equity, or good conscience. This mischief, remember, this is the mischief that reservation is supposed to resolve. Nothing to do with anything else except this. This mischief can only be avoided by destroying the monopoly of caste Hindus in public services and by regulating the recruitment to them in such a manner that all communities, including depressed, will have an adequate share in them. For this purpose, the depressed classes have to make the following proposals for statutory enactment as part of constitutional law. And then he drafts what is the original source of 16.4 as a constitutional provision to be included in 1935 Act, which it was in, but this is the draft from which 16.4 actually comes. What is this draft? It says, 1, there shall be established in India and in each province in India a public services commission to undertake the recruitment and control of public services. 2, no member of the Public Service Commission shall be removed except by a resolution passed by the legislature, nor shall he be appointed to any office under the Crown after his retirement. Independent Public Service Commission. 3, it shall be the duty of the Public Service Commission, subject to tests of efficiency as may be prescribed. A, to recruit the services in such a manner as will secure due and adequate representation of all communities. Due and adequate representation of not all classes, of all communities, B, to regulate from time to time priority in employment in accordance with the existing extent of the representation of various communities in any particular service concerned. Now, you'll see that in this whole language, there is no word reservation, there's no word backward. This came in the Constituent Assembly because there was a whole bunch of vast majority of dominant upper caste members who insisted that the only way they will accept reservation is on the justification of compensation for historic wrongs and for their economic upliftment and their cultural upliftment and so on. Whereas the only demand of the depressed classes is that we want representation. We want adequate due share. The problem we are trying to solve then and now is that the high caste officers have monopolized public services and are misusing the law and abusing the law to favor themselves and prejudice the rest of us. That's the problem we are trying to solve. And the word for reservation which we now call reservation, is regulating recruitment to public services. That's what we mean by reservation. That's the only meaning of reservation here. Regulating recruitment to public services in such a manner that all communities, including depressed classes, so including the higher castes, all communities will have an adequate share in them proportional to their population. So this is the real purpose. This is what we're talking about here. But starting from the Constituent Assembly and through judicial debates, through parliamentary interventions, through political discourse, the upper caste, until today in this presentation, the upper caste insist that this is about overcoming cultural deprivation. What cultural deprivation? Maybe the upper caste have cultural deprivation, but the others, nobody has cultural deprivation here, which is an impediment to their social advancement. That's very condescending. And so the only issue we are concerned here is how do we recruit people into the public services? And how do we give admissions to education, which is a feeder for public services, so that the oligarchy can be destroyed, the monopoly can be destroyed, and we can have a representative state, which was a mandate that the depressed classes gave to Ambedkar. We can have a representative state, which is the starting point of democracy. Deontologically, whether it's efficient or not, we are not here to be ruled by those who believe they're meritorious and superior to us and that we are culturally deprived. That's not what we are here for. We are here to rule ourselves, all of us, at least through representation of our groups. Why? Because we have a huge inequality of power between groups. And we believe a way to destroy that inequality is to create a representative government where everyone has a share in accordance with their population proportion that will solve the problem of intergroup equality and then permit us to move forward and talk about how we move forward in a democratic manner, including adopting policies on development in a democratic manner. So this is how I think the policy and the perception has been completely, totally destroyed. And distorted, sorry, not distorted. And the basic structure violation is, yes, it is discrimination and exclusion, as the dissent correctly says, but it is also the attack and destruction of the democratic, of the idea of a representative state by putting into the state a capsule of apartheid, of upper caste apartheid inside that state. And this will then, and also then to move towards using individual-based economic reservation to ensure that the due representation in public services of groups that were marginalized and exploited by some groups, but those who are marginalized and exploited, that process and mechanism for transforming an oligarchic state into a representative state will be aborted. That is the impact. Let me stop here, but I'm just painted a broad picture of these issues. I've just gone, cited the Ambedkar quotation and read it out. But each of this has to be explained in much more detail. But let me stop here.
Wow, this was a great presentation, and you have really turned it upside down in terms of the general understanding of EWS. I should add, I think, I don't know if you have seen the recent UGC regulation on celebration of the Constitutional Day.
Yeah,
they have declared some 16 topics on which seminars and academic programs, and one of them says the ideal king.
Yes,
which adds to your substantiation as of that apartheid state is coming back from that old Hindudom as a. So I mean the direction is very, very clear.
Very clear.
I think it's very clear in terms of what it wishes to do. So I think we should initiate a discussion in terms of.
I'm sorry if I exceeded your time, but
no, that's no absolutely fine. I mean,
I could do. Yeah.
No, I think because you had to do a basic structure version of these things, so you had to really fundamentally alter. So I mean, I have some points, but I think I would want to give both the other co-panelists, since you had some direct intervention.
I apologize to them, nothing personal.
No, absolutely. I think it does. I mean,
the nature of the argument, because it has so deeply been accepted that this is economic reservation, this is caste reservation, that OBC is caste reservation, OBC is economic reservation. Otherwise, you can't have transgender. You can't have, the National Commission for Backward Classes recommended some time ago that orphan should be brought into the backward classes. That's possible because any group that satisfies these economic, not financial, economic criteria of lack of resources, of resources that will enable you to achieve well-being, is entitled to be a backward class. It's unfortunate that the Constituent Assembly forced a compromise of using the word backward, drawn from Mysore, the experience in Travancore, Mysore, Maharashtra, Madras, because this was known to them. But you'll notice that in the original formulation of 16.4 of Dr. Ambedkar, the word backward doesn't come in. The word reservation doesn't come in. So let us between us understand that the real discussion is on how do we regulate recruitment to public services to ensure there is a representative state, and we address the huge inequality between groups and make sure all groups have equal representation, after which gradually groups will become less and less important and they may disappear, where once we achieve that kind of equality. That's the kind of transition that Dr. Ambedkar's original formulation of 16.4, I wish that had been enacted exactly as I read it out to you. It would have, saved the whole situation from this huge misunderstanding, where the forward classes are gleefully eating up the word backward because it helps them to reassert their inherent sense of superiority. Saying you're all backward, we are forward, and we are trying to help you come up. Actually, Chaturvarnya is only a system of reservation. And so they love reservations. They get a variety of multiple reservations. Sportsman reservation, reservation for children of central government officers in central schools, blah, 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 blah. Whole set of reservations. They never complain against that. They don't say it affects merit. They don't think of Kenneth Arrow when it comes, let's do sport. Why do we need sports reservations to have a representative state? Why do we need to give overrepresented communities 10% exclusive reservation to achieve a representative state? right? So there's no logic behind any of this. They never complain. The only thing they complain against, the only reservation they complain against, because reservation is their system. The only person who argued that reservation was dangerous and should never be used beyond regulating recruitment. I didn't use that word, those words there, would have taken long to explain that, but using that now, beyond regulating recruitment into public services for achieving a representative Indian state. The only person who argued that was me on behalf of backward classes. Those who appeared on behalf of Youth Against Equality and such radical anti-reservationists welcomed EWS, welcomed reservations, because they're comfortable with a society where which says this job is for you, this job is for me, this job is for someone else, everything is reserved. It is the struggle of Dr. Ambedkar and depressed classes that got us the right to equality in 14, 15, and 16. It was not a gift from these upper forward classes. That's why Ambedkar said, control reservation, don't let it go beyond 50%, because we won this right to equality in public employment. We can't damage what we have won through a hard struggle. And reservation should be used only for that word. We are not interested in reservation. We are interested in regulation of public recruitment to achieve a representative state. As a result, in 72 years, we have monitored reservation, 50%, 70% reservation in what? Group 3, Group 4 jobs. Have we monitored representation of the 100%, not the 50%, at the top levels of government? How much representation is there in the judiciary, in the executive, in the media, in academia, in the media? How representative are these crucial institutions? We have no data, and that's why they're avoiding a social census. They want to hide the truth. And we have completely taken our eye off the issue of adequate representation, which is what now the good news from this judgment is we are now able to go back to the 1930 formulation and focus the attention of the unrepresented classes. I won't say backward classes, the unrepresented communities on the issue of is India representative or not. The United States insisted on having a black woman as a Supreme Court judge when one judge, Stephen Breyer, retired. Why? Because they care about representation. In 2022, they are worried that all communities should be represented. They had a black man, but not a black woman. So they said, let's get a black woman on the judge. Only 9 judges, right? They don't have a single white Anglo-Saxon Protestant judge in the US Supreme Court, which is the equivalent of the upper caste here. Small but very powerful community. They don't have a single judge who was born into a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant background on the US Supreme Court. It's like having an Indian Supreme Court, but there's not a single person born into a Dvija background. Because they care about representation, particularly of the small and weaker groups. Because they know that if the small groups, the weaker to get strong, country is safe. Imbalance power will reduce. Right? So we have to forget about reservation, refocus our attention on how we regulate recruitment into public services to ensure that they are representative and end this massive, massive lack of representation.
Yeah, thanks. So I was wondering, yes, Arun, I think you would have a question. I think you can also focus on what Professor Mohan Gopal might think of the kind of suggestion of the structural common schools kind of a system that you were suggesting, whether that would kind of be a follow-up act of what he's saying. Does it really take us in a different direction? I think there are huge conceptual issues here. Yes, Mr. Arun, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
And my apologies in advance to both of them. I was just focusing on the...
No, absolutely. I think that's, I think they will take it in the spirit of the discussion very much, Mohan. I think that's not a problem.
I have huge respect for them, what they've said. Yeah.
It was a pleasure to listen to Mr. Mohan Gopal. Now, I have 2 questions about what you said. How do you regulate public recruitment to achieve equal representation without an instrumentality? And what is that instrumentality, possible instrumentality, apart from quotas?
Okay. Do you want me to answer that?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, very quickly. Actually, see, I don't know what you mean by quota, so I don't want to answer something because this is another, it is like backward, quota. Now, why is sports reservation not considered a quota? Why is women's reservation not considered a quota? Why is EWS not considered a quota? Have you seen in any of this debate EWS referred to as a quota? Right? So let's not use the word quota. See, what Ambedkar himself...
reservations.
Yeah, no, let's not use... See, let's look at what Ambedkar said in what I read out. He himself said, and let me just get that back and just read that because he answers your question. See, he says, the Public Service Commission shall regulate from time to time priority in employment. That's what he means by recruitment. Priority in employment in accordance with the existing extent of representation of various communities in any particular service concern. So he envisages, like in the United States and so on, a flexible method of saying, okay, we establish, broadly speaking, the proportion of the population size, because that's the only objective measure in a democracy where it's all about people. So the size of various populations, and then we monitor broadly representation. That's what the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission in the US does with the private sector. If they find that a company is only with white people, they will issue a notice. Why is it that you don't have diversity? And the company will have to say, these are the reasons we went through the process. Are you practicing discrimination? And if you can't, it is illegal to do what they call racial steering when you have housing. You can't say, look, I'll only have Indians in one area, one development. And so there are various methods in which you ensure that you monitor the representation in all these sectors, because representation is fundamental to democracy. Everyone must have voice, with the smaller groups having a floor, minimum floor, and the larger groups giving up some of the extent of their representation, and so that to give space for the smaller group. So what Ambedkar says is the Public Service Commission should regulate from time to time, review who is represented, who is not, give those who are, reduce the priority in employment. These are the words: priority in employment for those who are overrepresented, increase the priority in employment for those who are underrepresented, because ultimately we want a country where everybody has a voice, a seat at the table. Very, very brief point. This Black woman who was appointed to the Supreme Court, I don't know if you heard this, but if you go to the YouTube and search for the first speech she made after she took office, she said in a moving way, she said, I now have a seat at the table. She repeated that, I have a seat at the table. When she said she was speaking on behalf of Black women. We have a seat, I have a seat at the table, having come through that experience, right? So we should all have a seat at the table. We don't accept that anyone, including amongst us, is superior to anyone else, culturally superior or socially superior, more intellectual. We don't believe in a hierarchical society. So Ambedkar says, regulate from time to time. Public Service Commission, be flexible, increase. It's a permanent mechanism. This mechanism to regulate employment and fix priority in employment is a permanent mechanism, but increase and decrease it in accordance with from time to time in accordance with the adequacy of representation.
So let me add to Ms. Arun's question, Professor
Yes.
Mohan Gopal. So how do you account for are you suggesting that the constitutional discourse and this entire language of quotas, because you're challenging the entire vision that, this language of quotas, this language of OBC reservation being actually caste-based reservations. So where did this enter in the public domain? I mean, that's how the discourse has been running for the last 30, 40 years.
From the Constituent Assembly, because as I said, if you read the debate on reservations, almost all those who came from socially dominant oligarchic communities, they all saw this as something which is against equality, exception. Let's do this: historical discrimination, compensation, upliftment, cultural deprivation, social deprivation, and we must bring them up to our level and so on. But all those who spoke, by and large, from the depressed classes, saw this only in Ambedkar's terms, regulating public employment, because there was already a history of that, as you know, almost 75 years of history or more, from Travancore and Mysore and Madras and Maharashtra, Sahu Maharaj, and all that, of regulating public employment to make it more representative, which is commonly referred to as a non-Brahmin or an anti-Brahmin movement, right? So in a sense, there was a huge assault by the oligarchy on the idea of a representative state. That's the bottom line. They don't want a representative state because that means they will lose their power. They want an oligarchic state, and they justify it through merit. They've never defined merit. To this day, there is no definition of what are the qualifications to any of these big offices, including the judiciary. They trust us. We know who is good and who is not. We think this guy is good. So merit is not taken seriously. Ambedkar said efficiency and merit, but we have no measurable indicators of efficiency or merit. So we're not serious about that. We are just protecting and preserving the oligarchy, and all the problems challenges we face can be traced back to this oligarchy, not only in public employment, but in various sectors of our life, multiple oligarchies all over the country. And Ambedkar's idea was, and the depressed classes idea was, that if we have a representative state, then that representative state can be an instrument through which oligarchies can be attacked and destroyed in all other sectors of our society.
So just to follow up on that, so how would you see then SC and ST reservations? Because they surely fall in the purview of the way you're putting in terms of population and representation.
Same thing. Ambedkar was speaking on behalf of all the depressed classes, including scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. They must also have, so 1/4 of the Supreme Court must be SC and ST, roughly. We're not talking of precise numbers. Nobody does that. But broadly speaking, over a period of time, now take the largest Hindu community of Kerala, Irava community, nearly 1/4 of 20, no, we don't know, we don't have a census, but roughly 1/4 of the population of the state. Not a single member from that community has been a Supreme Court judge in 72 years. I have not seen a judge with the name Yadav in the Supreme Court in 72 years. Right. So this is unacceptable. We don't need to say we need 2.5 Yadav judges or 3.5 Irava judges. No. But broadly speaking, you can't have vast sections of the, let alone other less powerful depressed classes who have absolutely no, I know many small communities in my state in Kerala who don't have a single member in the legislative assembly, no senior bureaucrats, no seat at the table of power at all. It's very dangerous for our country. So I think
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's other questions I have, but I think quickly, Mr. Abdul, do you have something to say?
No, I have no comments to make. But today, the presentation of Professor Mohan Gopal was so wonderful that I had to unlearn many things. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, I think it's the same here. All of us, I think, I have to rethink some of. I think through social sciences we entered, but Professor Mohan Gopal being law, I think is given also as a historian. So you have a couple of questions, Professor Mohan Gopal, in the Q&A.
Yes.
Would you be able to open that?
Yes, certainly. I just want to say one thing which I've said to several audiences. God forbid. But if one day in future, the upper castes of this country are in the same situation as Muslims of India, with virtually no representation in the legislature, executive or judiciary of consequence, it is this principle of Dr. Ambedkar that will protect them. And say that they also must have adequate representation, and we will fight for that. We will fight for that. The Muslims will fight for that more than anyone else, to ensure that the upper caste must also have a seat at the table, but in proportion to their population, right? So we are talking. This is not against anyone. We are simply everyone must, all communities. That's why Ambedkar uses the word not depressed classes. All communities must have due and adequate representation in the public services. That is the vision that must guide us.
Well, I can almost smell the spirit of Franz Fanon. Arun, you had something to say? No? Okay.
Did you want me to open a Q&A?
I know. I mean, Naina, can you read them out for Professor Mohan Gopal?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that will make it more convenient for him.
Begation Ji from Hyderabad is asking,
Yes.
from Professor Mohan Gopal, is not the reservation ST and SC also considered social conditions apart from the economic criteria?
Yes. So this is where I think we must understand the word economic, different from financial. Right? Now, why is it that this is not on the constitution, why is it that the implementation of EWS by the central government and state governments are only focusing on financial criteria, namely how much income you have and what kind of real property do you have, land and housing and so on, right? Why? Because if they take the economic concept, which is multidimensional, look at the MDPA, multidimensional poverty index. There's several multidimensional considerations, which include what we are calling social considerations, your social status. Amartya Sen once described poverty as the ability to appear in shame. Ability to appear in public without shame.
Sense of self.
Ability to appear in public without shame. Now, is that a social criterion? Is that economic? It is an economic criterion, because the whole idea of economics is to study the kind of resources that society requires and individuals require to achieve and pursue well-being. Right. So what we are calling social, that is looked at in scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and in so-called backward class reservations, are all economic in nature, not financial in nature. Interesting that the central government and other governments have not included wealth criteria in these financial criteria. So you may have less than 8 lakhs income, but you may have huge shareholding, assets in the bank. That won't stop you from being economically weaker section. And actually, we get a very good definition of economic weaker section from Article 46 of the Constitution, for those who are asked that question and who want to understand that. Article 46 of the Constitution says, the state shall promote with special care the educational and economic interests of the weaker sections of the people. I said to the Supreme Court, weakness is a quality. It comes from the French word weak, means which cannot resist, weakness to resist, inability to resist. So all these people, all these groups are groups that suffer from weakness of different kinds. They can't resist, right? So weaker sections of the people, and in particular, so that shows that they are part of the weaker sections of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, which means the government said we are implementing EWS. We are enacting EWS to implement Article 46. Article 46 says this is for weaker sections, in particular scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and they've kicked SC and ST out of EWS. And then 46 says, and shall protect them from social injustice and all forms of exploitation. So we need economic criteria that will ensure that this goes to social injustice. So social prejudice and injustice. If you got Islamophobia, that is social injustice. So you have to be victims of injustice. If you got caste phobia, that's injustice, right? So you have to protect them from injustice. Gender discrimination is social injustice, right? So you must give. That's why women's reservation is fully justified within the framework of 46. 16.4 is justified within 46. Persons with disability reservation is protected within 46. But what about reservation for children of central government officers in Kendriya Vidyalaya? I benefited from that. My father was a central government employee. I studied in the Kendriya Vidyalaya. But looking back, I can say that it was not diverse enough in terms of our background. We were all just children of mostly government officers. And that has really, narrowed our understanding of the world. And but no one has complained about that. No one has said, how long will this go on? How long will you give children of generation after generation of central government officers reservation in Kendriya Vidyalaya, right? Or domiciliary reservation. In most national law schools, in many competitive places, you're giving domiciliary reservation. Nobody asked these questions. But 46 gives us a very good framework. It says, look at people who are weaker sections of the people, including particularly scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, educationally and economically weak, and who require protection from social injustice and exploitation. Now, this group is not suffering. They're from socially and educationally forward classes, certainly not suffering from social injustice and exploitation. So, so Parliament has this is why, from a legal point of view, not as a layperson's term, I argued before the Supreme Court that this amendment is a fraud on the Constitution.
But no, but just to, before you read other questions, Professor Gopal, then you're reducing it in terms of, obviously representation works in a social and political context. How would you see this entire debate of stigma attached to reservation and stigma attached to caste? I mean, surely representation has not done much in terms of those criteria, in terms of how these groups are viewed. So should we take it as a limitation of this? Should we separate this from stigma, or would you just say this is the problem of the caste Hindus and their gaze?
Yeah. See, I think the definition of poverty offered by offered by Amartya Sen includes the idea of stigma.
Yeah.
And so it is very much an economic concept. So if you want to look at economically weaker sections, educationally and economically, we must look at economic in multidimensional poverty terms. So the criteria for economic reservation should include, as it does for backward classes, not for EWS, as it does for backward classes, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, must include the economic concepts of weakness. So if you look at these 15 concepts, they include social, as I said, social, educational, economic, and political representation, right? So all of this is taken into account comprehensively. And so that is the closest we have to a actually scientific definition of economic of weakness, of weaker sections, which are already here. So there was no, and this is open to to those who are groups that are within that frame, I mean, within that definition from the upper castes. So there was no need to create this EWS unless you wanted to attack the idea of a representative state.
I mean, the clear example is our Prime Minister, who is a Vaishya, who is an OBC, declared OBC. So that's a very clear example that there's no bar on.
I'm sure his community is his community, I'm not talking about him, his community is supposed to be genuinely suffering from social deprivation, disadvantage, lack of representation. So that's fine. The fact that you are I'm not saying he is, I don't know, but even if he's a Janeyu wearing, even if they are Janeyu wearing Vaishyas, the fact is that they are socially, they're marginalized and underrepresented or unrepresented, even if you have one prime minister. See, the group representation ensures that the group has to become powerful, not you take one individual, make him prime minister, take one woman, make her prime minister, and then leave the rest of the women as a group, weak compared to males, and which we are all, some of us are part of here, and we enjoy the benefits of being male. But we want to eliminate that power difference between men and women. And one way to do that, which we accept for women, but we don't accept for castes, is simply to give them, we don't consider women as culturally deprived. Why? Because some of them are upper caste, right? But when they get representation, then the stigma will reduce. When the power difference between male and female reduces and disappears, then there will be no stigma anymore. There is no stigma anymore. So this is a path to ending stigma and building a democratic society that was much discussed, debated, implemented in the South for maybe nearly more than a century now, picked up by Dr. Ambedkar 91 years ago. He made the speech 91 years ago. He presented these demands, right? We are still reluctant to actually give up the oligarchy.
No doubt. I think there's absolutely no doubt. Do you want to read other questions, Naina?
Yes, sir. We have two more questions. For employment and education, number of states and local governments are coming with reservation for local populace and also imposing on private sector. How do we see this phenomena in this discussion on EWS reservation? And the other one, question by Vandana Rathorji. Why is the judgment on EWS not being stayed with immediate effect? In my understanding, it violates the principle of Constitution of India for Mr. T.K. Arun, and I have read your opinion on the same.
So
perhaps
this is,
Mr. Arun can answer first and then I'll come later.
yeah,
because
there's also a question by Mr. Vijay Ji. No, the first one, Naina, that's again for Mr. Mohan Gopal.
Yeah. Mr.
Right
Arun
at the,
can answer the second question first, and then I'll come in just so that we can have a break of, of speakers.
I don't think there was any particular specific question. I mean, what I wrote on this, I make this point that you made, that this is actually reservation for the upper caste. And so, I mean, there is no particular elucidation that is required as a result of this question.
Yeah. And what was the other, broadly, Naina, what was the first question that you just give me the gist? You don't have to read the whole thing, then it'll come back to me.
Yes, sir. It was about the employment and education, as a number of states and local governments are coming with reservation of local populace and also imposing private sector.
Yeah. So the one of the arguments I made was that Dr. Ambedkar said reservation has to be contained. I argued reservation is dangerous because reservation is actually excluding someone who is otherwise entitled from an opportunity, right? We must have very good reason to do that, and the only reason we have brought forward is to have a representative state and not have an oligarchy. It should not be used for any other purpose. The Constitution has only 6 references to used to have only 6 references to reservation, and that was all in aid of representation. But reservation is an idea of Chaturvarnya. The Savarnas love it because this is their normal order. Women, you have this role. Men, you have this role. This community, you clean excreta. This community, you do pujas, right? This is all reserved. So they are pushing us back to a system of reservations. Reservation is not an idea of the depressed classes. Reservation is the idea of the dominant classes. So they're expanding it to various fields because they want to exclude people. They don't want representation. They're a small oligarchy and they want to control all fields of life. Now, India can never move forward. No country in the world has been able to move forward if power is concentrated in the hands of a very tiny microscopic minority. Even if they're God's own gift to mankind, let's concede that they are God's own gift to mankind, right? But still, or not to womankind, but to mankind, right? But still, if there is a representative state, we'll move forward. Remember how the world changed when the Protestants overthrew, the domination of their religion by a small group of people. You can see wherever representative democracy has expanded, including in communist countries. See how they moved and became, Russia transformed from being a feudal backwater to being a powerful country. Even now it's a powerful country. China transformed, right? Basically what happened in all these cases is that the oligarchies were broken, and that was done violently. The question is, can you break down an oligarchy non-violently? Dr. Ambedkar has given us a formula for that, and that is regulating recruitment to public employment. We can break down an oligarchy in the state through that peaceful mechanism. If that fails, we are going to force those who are excluded into violence. And
very curious to know your view on Gandhi's position on separate electorate. He thought that separate electorates would create political untouchability.
Yeah.
How would you then view that? I mean, there is a social question which might escape reservation. Might escape representation. Gandhi, I think, was laying his premium on that. How do you look at that?
Yeah. So the point is, Ambedkar did not, in either condition, talk of a reservation. He talked about effective representation, right? So he basically said that people must choose their representative effectively. It's like saying, the European Union will have, European Union is smaller than India in terms of population and so on, at least now, so you can't have the, Italian president chosen by the whole of Europe, right? So you have Italians, or you got Swiss people choosing their own president, their own representatives. If you look at India as a union, which it is, as a vast and diverse union, Of who? What are the units? That's a big question. Ambedkar says it's a union of communities. Union of communities. So each community must elect its own representatives. Otherwise, it will not be effective. And Kanchiram wrote this famous book, Chamcha Age. He said the moment you had the Pune Pact, we launched into the Chamcha Age because only the Chamchas will be chosen from these excluded non-oligarchic communities, depressed classes by the oligarchs, and they will never question the oligarchs, right? So, so the issue of representation was Ambedkar saying every community should be represented by people that it chooses democratically. And Gandhiji is saying, I am your representative. I will represent everyone. I will represent the depressed classes, quote unquote, the untouchables, the Muslims. Jinnah, you go home. Ambedkar, you go home. I represent everyone, right? That's similar to what we are hearing today, right? I will represent everyone. You will not have your own leaders. You will not have your distinct social identities. We will all be homogenized, right? And we'll be given numbers. Maybe even names will be too much distinction. So we'll all be given numbers. So one of the last opportunities to address each other by name, uniform numbers. Homogenize everyone, right? And then so when the Gandhiji's I was not just Gandhiji, it was the oligarchy. The oligarchy will represent everyone, and we will look after you. Whatever you wish, we'll help you. We'll help you get richer, fatter, whatever you want. We'll help you to do that. But don't ask for a chair. The chair will be occupied by only by us. Only we are.
No, make a more fairer reading of Gandhi's concern was not the chair. The point is, how do we build social affinities? What Ambedkar's concept of, how do you then read Ambedkar's concept of fraternity here? That there has to be an associational life that also has to go beyond these identities. I think that way of structuring, one of the worries was that way of structured representation would lead to a kind of a permanent state of non-solidarity, concern for fraternity. I mean, if you make let's give a benefit of doubt to Gandhi, then why would that not be a problem?
Yeah. So what will be the cement of fraternity? What will be the cement of fraternity? So you can have a oligarchy, that gives a national ideology, or and let that oligarchy be communist or socialist or Gandhian or whatever you want to be. But there's a group of people who say this is the right way to read history. This is the right way to understand society. This is the right definition of welfare, well-being, and this is the only way. And if you don't believe in this, then we'll kill you, right? And so we build solidarity around the belief in one ideology, which is proclaimed by the oligarchy. Alternatively, I can't speak, obviously no one can speak for Dr. Ambedkar, but what I understand, what comes across is in the Constitution is we build solidarity in a completely different way. And that is by accepting 5 principles: freedom, equality, dignity, and based on freedom, equality, and dignity, fraternity, right? Where we respect each other's freedom, equality, and dignity. And on that basis, we build fraternity. And our vested interest is to be part of a country where each of us has freedom, equality, and dignity. And we are fraternal and social, the cement that joins us. And then the 5th is democracy. The commitment, demos, as you know, means common people. Kratos means power. So democracy means power is in the hands of common people, of the demos. So these 5 principles is what builds solidarity for us. Within that, we have freedom to have any idea we want about how society should be organized, what is history, how do you explain this, how do you analyze that, right? So that produces a very dynamic society. But we say, look, I have to convince you. I can't force you. I can't command you. I'm saying, look, if you don't believe in this ideology, you're out of this country, right? Or we'll kill you. But we will talk to each other, and then we'll talk to others. And then in a democratic manner, we will build a consensus, right? As we are now doing in this conversation, right? And so that was the fundamental basis of solidarity. And that comes not only from the Western experience, but I think from a principle which is, I think, very important to all the diverse, philosophical schools. And that is the idea of compassion, It's very important in all these traditions, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, Jain, that we must have compassion towards not only other human beings, but towards, towards everything. But, and to give autonomy to people, right? And let them employ their mind fully. And from that will come a general welfare and well-being, by the process of debate, and discussion. But we want to build a society that is based upon Swaraj. After all, that's what we fought for, right? Individual Swaraj, not Swaraj for the oligarchy to throw out the British, but throw out the British and become a Swaraj oligarchy, but for each of us. So that's what should, this ability to live life with equality, freedom, dignity, and democracy, and in a democracy, that is the cement that should bind us. That's the theory of the Constitution.
And you're saying that this allows space for the so-called forward caste as per their numerical numbers in the population. That it's not that it's about being anti-forward caste, but it's in terms of their due space within.
Yes,
I think that debate is how I think that's fascinating. That we last month, I should share this with, we had a conference at Yale on the concept of solidarity. So that I think I wish you were there with us. This is really fascinating because it brings in this concept of solidarity, that identities are not in terms of a rupture of that solidarity, but how does identity convert into solidarity, as you're saying. That's I think it's fascinating.
And we are talking of organic identities here. We're not talking of state
manufactured
identity. And these are very, as you know better than me, they're very dynamic, they're very fluid, they keep changing. And people with this kind of freedom, there will always be revolts. It's like the Christian church in my state here in Kerala, it's fantastically dynamic. It has splintered off into so many individual local churches and philosophies, and they've grown in all ways. But do they have solidarity? Yeah, they have very strong solidarity, but based on this freedom of disagreeing on whatever they want to disagree. So I think we celebrate that, and that's that our union and solidarity must be based upon. That's the reason we want to be part of India, not in some other country where we'll have a view imposed on us. Or take even the Muslim community in Kerala, which is totally different in so many ways from other Muslim communities, because they have they have their own culture and tradition. The Kashmiri Muslims have their own culture and tradition. That doesn't make them less Islamic, but they are celebrated as Muslims. It gives them tremendous diversity and tremendous richness. And so I think this way our commitment is to respect each other's views and to resolve our differences in a democratic manner through consensus, and through not consensus without elections or anything like that, through discourse. Rather, I prefer to use the word discourse than consensus. Through discourse and mutual conversation and understanding, and through agreed.
But Granville Austin says that that's been the strength of constitution making process. He says accommodation and consensus were what were unique to the constitution making process in India. Do you think that was a deceptive consensus
in India?
Yes, Granville Austin, you must have read.
I think that I don't agree there's consensus. I define the Constitution of India as a site of struggle. The genius of Ambedkar was he rather than seek a consensus on what India should be and its ideology and its methods, Ambedkar brought in to the Constitution. That's how he changed the initial draft. He brought into the Constitution space for all competing ideologies, the major competing ideologies, which are basically either a welfare state, what we have a centrist ideology of a welfare state, or on the left, socialism and communism. I don't collapse the two together, but so socialism and communism, and the center, which is also distinct, the central ideology, which is social welfare, and on the social welfare. And on the right, we have two strong ideologies of a Hindu Rashtra and of capitalism. And you'll find in the Constitution elements that accommodates all five ideologies. All five ideologies. And now there's competition between them to dominate the Constitution with their ideology. where the left and the middle have actually fallen behind.
I
And
think Mr. Arun wants to leave. Do you want to say something, Mr. Arun,
No,
before you?
no, the conversation is going well. I have to. I have
Yeah,
to-
but that thing. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for
So
giving
we
the
will
opportunity.
conclude with the last question, Professor Mohan, you have, is from Mr. Vijay, while he says that all talks are educative and all that. He says, Professor Mohan Gopal, you seem to have missed out on neoliberal model of development as it actually deprived all communities of opportunities. And therefore, has enabled this mischief of 103 amendment to seem very relevant.
yes, no, I agree with that. That's why I said in this broad picture, I put neoliberal under the broad framework of capitalism, which I think you may agree with me. And it's just one current version of capitalism. But the Constitution has allowed that to develop, because the challenge in the Constitution is we have to fight our own internal battles now to establish the nature of the Constitution. It's work in progress. The Constitution has provided the space for all of us to ensure that the vision of India it becomes eventually one or the other, and we can't let we can't be watching idly while one or two groups push forward their agenda, namely the capitalists and the Hindu Rashtra people. Because what I want to say is that there is no need to overthrow this constitution for us to become a Hindu Rashtra.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, to some extent, we already have become Hindu Rashtra. We've just put a Chaturvarnya principle of pure space of purity for only upper forward classes inside the constitution, right? And so this constitution of these other ideas which I define. So we need to ensure that we have to take this out, and we have to ensure that the constitution is it does not, at least it stays in the centrist space. If not, it cannot come into the left space, it must at least stay in the centrist space. And we have to work very hard to ensure this. And so what I am suggesting or requesting is that we must all come together to elect a parliament where, regardless of party flag, more than 2/3 of the members will pass an amendment to remove 15(6) and 16(6) from the constitution. This and rid the constitution of this apartheid space which has been put into it, which can destroy the concept of a representative state, which is at the heart of democracy, and in addition to damaging equality, right? So that should be our aim. And second aim is, since the majority judgment of Justice Maheshwari in the first paragraph says that this is not mandatory, it's an enabling clause. At the state level, we should mobilize opinion to ensure that, including the left government in Kerala, should stop implementing EWS. They have the right to do so. But the forward classes are so powerful inside the left that they won't let it happen. And there's a huge debate on that. So we must stop EWS from being implemented in any state, and then we should at the soonest mobilize a 2/3 majority to rid the constitution of this cancer which has been put inside it, which can potentially kill the idea of a democratic India.
Indeed, it's very disturbing. I mean, more disturbing than we are thought, that EWS a kind of damage it have done, because you have rightly named it as an apartheid state.
Yes.
And I think we should really take it more seriously in terms of a campaign, in terms of course, there are other questions of political mobilization, why most political parties are silent about it. Is it only about their caste background, or is it about electoral arithmetic? Also, the question that why you think BJP thinks it can get away with such a provision and not lose the social base of SC, ST and OBCs. I mean, because after all, BJP is also in an electoral game. That why do you think they think that this is not going to hurt their social base? See,
this is this is sheer speculation, because we can't answer that. But after all, this party was formed by the forward classes, so they have to build a temple. They have to create a Savarna only space inside public employment and public education, apartheid space. These are all core demands, so they can't not do it. But they've tried to sugarcoat it in a deceptive manner, calling it economically weaker sections and saying other than blah, 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 and so on, so that they're selling it to the backward classes, saying this is just for poor people, this is not for others, and we are not disturbing your reservation. For the underrepresented, every percentage point counts. So you've taken 10% away and converted it into an apartheid, caste apartheid space. That should have gone to reducing the lack of representation, not increasing the lack of representation, right? So you have actually made it worse, made the problem, but people are not understanding this. But I'm glad to say that the people are now, more and more becoming very aware of this. And I think at some point, this conflict that you're saying between putting this Chaturvarnya provision inside the constitution, which is Chaturvarnya is the philosophy of reservation, right? Of reserving excluding people and reserving something for them. And the conflict and their vote base. This conflict, we can't predict how it's going to evolve, but it is a fault line for them. And we'll see how it's a
how it plays out.
I'm happy to say the CPI, not the CPM.
Yeah,
the CPI has taken a progressive position and is actively pursuing that, and that's actually causing some reflection in the CPM. And as a result of this,
and the double whammy is that it doesn't even help the poor among the forward castes.
Yeah. See, the poor among the forward castes, if they need help, they can be part of backward classes. The door is open to them. If their ego comes in the way, that's their problem.
Yeah, exactly. That we can't help. After that, we can't
there's
help.
No need for this. The only idea is, as someone said, the main idea is to have an exclusive space where there is no one else. Only forward classes, only the elite. And that's the idea. But if the poor wants reservation, they now have two options. As I said, they can either go here or here. They can which compartment to enter. It's a problem of plenty for them. And therefore,
fascinating.
EWS cutoff is getting lower than ST cutoff in Kerala, which means you can just walk into EWS reservation because there's such few people. Their numbers are much less than 10%. So anyone is able to get in. The cutoff is very low, whereas SC, ST, and OBC, the numbers are so high that the competition is so tight that the cutoffs are higher. So the people are realizing, coming to see, coming to realize the injustice, and that this is really a reassertion of caste supremacy. That's what it is.
Absolutely. So we have I think we have run out of time, but Vagesham, if you have a very pressing question, yes, you can quickly ask and then we can close the session.
Yeah, Professor Mohan, Gopal, thank you so much. It was scintillating and re-educating, because this has been what I've been arguing. Because reservation is about hierarchy. I was always telling that reservation is all about hierarchy. So the word reservation is fundamentally a problematic thing. And really, really, you substantiated it, and you really gave me a kind of a vindication for my older argument. Thank you so much. That I teach political science at Nalsa University of Law. So that's one thing. And finally,
thank you so much.
Should there not be a kind of a cumulative criteria? Ashwin Deshpande and Yogendra Yadav way back were talking about when we are trying to provide reservations. Shall there not be a kind of a complex 4-point or 5-point criteria? Because, for example, finally, I'll take not more than 1 minute. If in current kind of reservation, say even in the scheduled tribes, because I take the example of Telangana, where a tribe basically, which is more plain area type, is amassing so much of tribal reservation space. If that is the case, should there not be a cumulative kind of a thing, like the deprivation can be scaled, like disability, education, and kinds of stuff. So there had been an article, there had been an argument for this. So some sort of a criteria, cumulative criteria be developed to provide representation for really underprivileged. That's one thing which I'm thinking. Thank you so much for enlightening. And then I was in 6th and 7th. If somebody asked me to start writing something, but you made it very clear from where I should start, I will start. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and thank you for your very kind words. And I just want to say that what we have to remember is reservation is only a tool. The problem we are trying to solve is there is an oligarchy and we want to transform it peacefully into a representative state. So what is a formula for that is the issue. And frankly, poverty or rich wealth doesn't have anything to do with it. Let's assume there is community X and every one of them is a millionaire, right? They still must have a due and adequate representation. They must have a seat at the table, whether you're rich or you're poor, whatever group you come from, every group must have a seat at the table. And so we have to unlearn this whole distortion which was directed by the oligarchy to preserve themselves and prevent a representative state. And we have to now focus rigorously on the issue of representation, for which we need a social census, not a caste census, because caste is a word you can use only for the caste Hindus, not for the outcasts. They're out of caste, they have no caste. So we can't have a caste census. We can have a census of communities and find out their actual population. Then we can look at the representation, broadly speaking, the representation, glaring issues of non-representation. And then we come up with a formula to implement representation, starting with the not deprivation, but the least represented must be given the highest priority. So if you got what we now call a backward class that has reasonable representation, say 10% of what they should be, then but there is another group that is only 0% reservation, then you got to give priority to the 0% so that they have some representation. So that's our whole focus must be on ensuring a representative state. And that's complicated. That has its own complications. But there's a lot of good experience in democratic countries on ensuring representation. And all groups. So yes, all groups that are discriminated against, that are excluded, that consider themselves a group, must be represented. So if whether they are transgender, whether they are whatever group they are, we must ask them if they claim to be a group. We accept that claim. Then we see if you have representation in one form or the other already, and if you can show that you're unrepresented, then as Ambedkar said, in proportion we should adjust the regulation of recruitment to ensure that they have representation. So we have to have a huge focus on monitoring and achieving representation, so that then we will come to the starting point of democracy when we have a representative state. And using that state, we can then attack monopolies and oligarchies that are plenty around us, economic and social and political. But thank you very much.
This is really fascinating, Professor Mohan Gopal, and also Abdul, thanks for joining in for your initial comments. We have so many more questions. We would actually need to spend half a day with you, because your questions also take us back to why did we not go in then for proportional representation as voting? Why would that have been really radical? So this whole misconception of a nation and notions of solidarity, in an ontological sense, I think you have now forced us to reread Ambedkar, because then Ambedkar, in essence, you're saying Ambedkar is not about caste at all. So you are actually rereading entire Ambedkar's discourse, and the question of representation is not about caste. And you said reservations is for the forward caste. It's not the discourse of the backwards. Yes. So these are like Paulo Freire's. You have really turned categories on their head. So, and that was really fascinating. Thank you once again for joining in. And now, Naina, do you want to say something, final words, thanking?
Yes.
And yes, over to you then.
Thank you. As we have come to the end of this enriching panel discussion on EWS reservations, perceptions and policy, as a part of our series, The State of Human Dignity and Development, #Inclusive Development, I, Naina, researcher at IMPRI, would like to formally propose a vote of thanks on behalf of the IMPRI, Center for Human Dignity and Development, and IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, we would like to express our gratitude to Dr. Ajay Gudavarthy for chairing today's session and our panelists, Professor G. Mohan Gopal, Sri T.K. Arun, Sri Abdul Hafiz Gandhi ji, for taking out their precious time and enlightening deliberation. And of course, we thank our audience here on Zoom or on Facebook Live for attending and participating in the session. We are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publication. I hope that you continue to tune in to future to our IMPRI hashtag web policy talks. Thank you once again and I wish you a very good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.